The Giant's Causeway, a majestic, natural beauty on the north coast of County Antrim, Northern Ireland. From the imposing cliffs with its sheer drops to the famous towers of basalts, which are the most expansive known on its kind on Earth. A well-known tourist attraction for at least the last 300 years. But how was it made, and what stories have been made around it?
There have been many theories about how the causeway was formed. The scientific conclusion came around 1765, when French geologist Nicolas Desmarais wrote that the columns were volcanic in origin, a conclusion he made just by viewing engravings of paintings made by Susanna Drury. While it wouldn't be confirmed until hundreds of years later, Desmarais was credited with the first explanation of the causeway's origin. It all started 60 million years ago. A gigantic volcanic eruption occurred, eventually creating the approximately 40,000 basalt columns we know as the causeway. Basalt columns are formed when lava cools and contracts to crack into long geometric columns after being forced through fissures in the earth. Depending on how fast this lava cools, creates a different number of sides to the columns, which is how it gets to be shaped either cylindrically, pentagonally, or hexagonally. This was all confirmed in 2018 by Professor of Volcanology Jan Leveille and his team at the University of Liverpool. They were able to recreate the exact conditions in a lab that were required to form the causeway columns. If you head to Giant's Causeway, you are bound to see a few features other than the columns, including the giant's chair, boot, and organ. And while they may be remnants of giants long gone, scientists say they have all come about through the erosion of the plateau that makes the causeway. Unfortunately for us, Giant's Causeway may not remain the way in which history has seen it, as it succumbs to erosion, destruction from increasing storms, and the rise of sea levels.
Locally, the causeway was known as the stepping stones of the Fomorians. The Fomorians were mythological giants who were said to have come up through the sea to settle in Ireland. Although there was a lot of speculation about who they were or what they were, there is little information about them beyond them being bringers of destruction. They have been often attributed as a personification of natural destruction that plagued Ireland. These steps are where these giants are meant to have emerged from the sea. There's a lot of variations on the story of the giant who created the Giant's Causeway, but the one I was told growing up goes as follows. There was an Irish giant called Finn McCool, who lived on the North Antrim coast with his wife Una, and a Scottish giant called Benandonner, who lived across the Irish Sea on the Scottish coast. Now, even though they had the Irish Sea between them, they absolutely hated each other. They would shout at each other all day long, hurling insults and threats at each other. Benandonner boasted that he was the biggest, strongest giant that had ever lived, and he wanted to fight Finn McCool to prove it. One day, Finn got up at the crack of dawn and began building a bridge across the Irish Sea. He was going over to Scotland to fight Benandonner. So off he goes, building his bridge made of stones, and eventually makes it across. So Finn sneaks up to where Benandonner lived. The giant was sleeping, but Finn got the shock of his life. Benandonner was at least twice the size of him, a giant of a giant, in fact. Finn knew he had no chance in beating Benandonner in a fight. He turned right around and started running across the bridge. Benandonner wakes up and sees in the distance Finn running, clambering over rocks, tripping over himself to get back to Ireland. He begins to take chase after Finn. Both giants were running across the Irish Sea as fast as they could. Finn makes it home first, but in his haste, his boot fell off, and in fact, is still there to this day. Finn makes it home, but he can hear Benandonner's thunderous footsteps coming across the bridge. Finn knows he's done for. But then the hero of the story steps in. It's Una. who is absolutely sick of this silly nonsense that's going on between the giants. It's doing her head in, but she has a plan. She dresses Finn in baby clothes, complete with a bonnet, and makes him lie in the bath and pulls the curtain around him. Then she waits for Benandonner's arrival. Well, it isn't too long before he arrives, and he's ready for a fight. He knocks on the door. Una tells Finn to pretend he's asleep. Una answers the door and invites Benandonner inside to wait, as she tells him that Finn is out hunting. So he waits, and during that time Una asks him if he would like to meet Finn's son. Intrigued, he agrees, but when Una pulls back the curtains and Benandonner sees this huge, fully bearded baby sleeping, he suddenly thinks to himself, if this is Finn's baby, who's as big as a fully grown giant, how big must Finn be? Much bigger than me. A wave of terror washes over Benandonner as he runs as fast as he can across the Irish Sea. But as he does, he smashes up the bridge Finn made along the way, ensuring that he would never have to face what must actually be the biggest giant to ever exist. And Finn and Una never heard from him again. And so, all that's left of the bridge to Scotland is the Giant's Causeway where Finn first started building, and then the end of the bridge, all the way over in Scotland on the island of Staffa at Fingal's Cave.
Although the causeway was well known to locals as the stepping stones of the Fomorians, it was not officially discovered until 1692 when William King, a man who happened to be the Anglican Bishop of Derry and would eventually become the Archbishop of Dublin, decided to take a holiday to the north coast. His findings were reported by Richard Buckeley to Dr. Martin Lister in the College of Physicians and Royal Society in a letter dated April 24th, 1693. In this letter, Buckeley describes the towering pillars of perpendicular cylinders that had never before been seen. They came in cylinders, hexagons, and pentagons about 18 to 20 inches wide, and were so close together that you could barely fit a knife in between them. These were depicted in the published version of the letter in the Philosophical Transactions, alongside an engraving of a drawing of the Causeway by Christopher Cole. In a follow-up letter to Lister a few years later, in 1698, by Dr. Thomas Molyneux, another man who had never been to the Causeway, a similar description is given. However, the art accompanying this letter was commissioned by Molyneux to provide a more realistic attempt at portraying the Causeway, and was provided by artist Edwin Sandys.
Almost 50 years later, between 1739 and 1740, Susanna Drury painted a few watercolours and received £25 for doing so, which, when valued today, would be around £7,000. These watercolours made their way across Europe and are regarded as a catalyst for bringing popularity to the Giant's Causeway. In 1788, one of the first guidebooks of Ireland was published, and in it there were details of the Giant's Causeway. The Causeway continued to be a highlighted tourism site, and in 1843 was granted a full supplement in the Dublin Penny Journal. In the years that followed, the Causeway became such a popular tourist destination that a tramway had to be introduced in 1883. It was the first long electric tramway in the world, running from its opening until 1949. However, it has since reopened on a volunteer basis since 2006. In the 1960s, the National Trust took over maintaining and running the Causeway attraction, and in 1986, UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site. The Causeway remains to this day one of the most popular tourist destinations for both international and local visitors. And although it did not win its nomination in 2007 to be one of the new 7 Wonders of Nature,